As we've seen so far in this new Formula One season, the 2026 new rules, quite difficult to decipher exactly what is going on after a Friday. We can look at the bare results. We can look at Oscar Piastri, quickest for McLaren-Mercedes. Good recovery for Oscar. Good confidence-boosting run for him today. Pretty trouble-free. Quick on the soft tyre. Pretty good on the long runs. We'll get onto that in a minute. Nothing like the same as Mercedes, though. But as I say, yeah, good for Oscar Piastri. Good for McLaren. Good recovery after both cars failing to take the start in the Chinese Grand Prix. Not such a good day for Lando Norris, though, in the other McLaren, in and out of the garage. Didn't get in a lot of laps, didn't get in a long run, but he showed some pace when he went out towards the end on soft tyres. No doubt it'll be a different story. Assuming they can get the car running consistently, it'll be a different story tomorrow and over the weekend. Mercedes second and third, Kimi Antonelli just ahead of George Russell. Another interesting twist for that storyline. Ferrari behind them, Charles Leclerc ahead of Lewis Hamilton, a progression of that storyline. But the other big story, well, is it a big story anymore? Red Bull powertrain Ford, well off the pace. Max Verstappen and Isaac Hadjar really struggling with that car. Max complaining throughout about understeer, particularly on medium and high speed corners. And I guess one of the big questions is whether Max can do anything about that understeer in the way that he was always able to do something when he had those issues prior to the 2026 regulations. So let's have a look at a breakdown of the quickest laps on the soft, the red Pirelli. Bear in mind, these are the hardest in the range of the Pirelli tyres around Suzuka. On the left, the column there is the start-finish line speed they were doing, which reflects somewhat how they were harvesting and or using power on that section of the road. Interesting that Mercedes were actually quicker on the start-finish line than they were on the long back straight going into 130R. So that tells you something about how they use and harvest the power around this lap. Then turn 1A, 1B. I've always referred to that very fast downhill plunge as turn 1A, and then it tightens up into what we call 1B, so 1A, 1B. Turn 7 is the exit at the top of the hill from the S's, which gives a good feel for how they've gone through the S's. You're not going to be quick there unless you've got the exit of 6 really nice, and you can be in the middle of the road for 7 and then get the power on nicely coming up over the hill into turn 7. 8, 9 are the two Degners, which we spoke about in the build up to this race. Really nice corners, two right-handers. Obviously 8 much quicker than 9. 13 and 14 are Spoon, the double apex left, a little bit like turn 1, but in reverse, left-hander, very fast entry, tightening up. 15 is the famous 130R corner, and 18 is the run out of the chicane before they get to the start-finish line. So let's have a look at what Oscar Piastri is doing there relative to everybody else. I think the significant thing there for me, certainly how quick it was over the start-finish line, which gives some sort of picture, I guess, of how well McLaren are now harvesting and deploying the power. Kimi Antonelli at the same point, 3:05. So Oscar there, very quick into turn 1, holding that speed for longer as well. When they get into the tight part of 1B, everybody basically doing the same speed through there. But look at that difference between Oscar and Kimi Antonelli through turn 7. This is on their quickest laps. Oscar really good out of the top of at the top of the hill there, out of the S's, substantially quicker than Kimi Antonelli. No real surprise there. We've been talking quite a lot on this channel about how Kimi is excellent on slow speed corners, really, really good early turn in, really good in the way he uses the brakes, the steering and the throttle, multitasking. But medium and high speed, he doesn't seem to have quite the same polish at the moment. It'll probably come. But there's a good example, turn 7, which does require really, really precise high speed change of direction. 244 compared with Oscar 253 at that point. Let's have a look now at what Charles Leclerc was doing there, however, 260. And doesn't that say a lot about Charles Leclerc's skill and how quick he is as a racing driver? That is one of the most demanding parts of any Grand Prix circuit in the world, at the top of the hill, out of the S's, doing 260, 7 kilometers an hour quicker than Oscar Piastri, who of course is significantly quicker there than Kimi Antonelli in a very good car. And look at poor old Max Verstappen there, where he used to be absolutely brilliant, right there, 247. That's nothing to do with power deployment. That's nothing to do with how they're using the energy on that Red Bull powertrain Ford engine. That is just the understeer in that car. And it's, well, it's the understeer in the car, but it's also because of the way the car and the power is harnessed, and because of the way the cars are now, Max unable to do anything about the understeer. That's the point, I think. And we see that also in turn 9. Look at Max Verstappen, turn 8, 239, about the same as Kimi Antonelli, a little bit quicker, same as Oscar Piastri going into the Degners, not bad at all. But the right-hander there, look at Max, 135 compared with Oscar 146. Ridiculous, ridiculous difference. In my opinion, that is Max's inability with these cars to be able to do anything about the understeer. He's just got to live with it like a normal racing driver. And that's very sad to see. 135 out of there, no wonder the thing's ridiculously slow. It's a similar story out of Spoon. Max 157, Oscar very good there, 168 compared with the 163 of Antonelli and Leclerc. But that's where Oscar again really quick. So again, just going back to the baseline of all this, yes, it's fascinating, I suppose, to see how all the energies are deployed differently around the lap, even on these individual laps. Nothing to do with lift and coast here. This is all just a flying lap on soft tires. And yet that's fascinating, but it's also frustrating, I think. It must be unbelievably frustrating for the driver, for the top drivers, not to be able to do anything about the shortcomings of their cars, because they just got to, the only way they can do something about it is to start playing around with deployment and harvesting of the energy. You can't do anything with the car now. You can't flick it here. You can't do that. You can't turn in on the brakes a little bit more. You can't use your subtle inputs just to balance the understeer against the oversteer. You can't do that because we know what happens. It just goes into power spikes, and that's the problem. That is the ultimate problem. And I think we're seeing that here around Suzuka, which was always going to be a real acid test for these regulations. By which I mean, is it going to bring out the best? Is it going to reward the best from the great drivers? Answer at the moment has to be no. So look at that. Max 131.5, Oscar Piastri 130. I mean, that is a ridiculous difference between those two drivers. You would imagine that the speed the speed differential that Max has over the others in the sort of 100 meters going into 130R and through 130R. Indeed, he lifts going into 130R. It's the only driver there that's actually lifting. Max Verstappen lifting through 130R. Jury's out a little bit because he was passing Lewis at that point. But nonetheless, there is a distinct lift from Max going into 130R. I haven't seen that for a long time, but 333. So I don't know. It's so complicated, isn't it? Let's have a look at something else that's a little bit easier to understand, and that is the runs, speeds they were doing on full fuel long runs. As you can see, a bit of a split there. We had the Ferraris, Mercedes, McLarens on mediums, the Red Bull, Alpine, and Audi on hards. So that has to be borne in mind. But Kimi Antonelli, look at that, 34.1, George Russell 34.4. So that was the fastest of the long runs that each of them did. They probably did a total of about 8 if things were going well. So 34.1 Kimi Antonelli, 34.4 George Russell, please note George, Oscar Piastri 34.8. Now there is the difference. Yeah, quickest on the soft tire run, but look at that. I mean, in terms of what's going to happen in the race, you don't have to look any further than that. McLaren still at least half a second away from Mercedes when it comes to fuel, and already we've seen that they possibly a suspect when it comes to time management compared with Merc as well. So yeah, you know, Mercedes weekend again. Charles Leclerc 34.9, and Lewis not very happy with his car on full tanks 35.3. Said he didn't have much confidence in the car. But 35.3. But there's Lewis Hamilton, no confidence in a Ferrari with a lot of fuel on board. But look at Max Verstappen, 35.7, admittedly on the hard tyre. But he's right there in Alpine territory. Now, that's where Red Bull are, going as quick as an Alpine, just. 37.7 for Pierre Gasly, Isaac Hadjar 37.7. So there's no doubt about where Red Bull are with pace. And look at Nico Hülkenberg in the Audi. Unbelievable, 35.8 on the hard tyre. So again, you know, how do you want to look at it? Red Bull are 1.5 seconds off the pace, but they're actually only a tenth quicker than Audi right now. I mean, it's unbelievable, really. And I've got Nico in there right at the end. He came in and went out on softs, did a 34.7 on the soft tire. But yeah, I guess some people might start on the soft, it being the hardest of the compound range that Pirelli have. So yeah, not quite sure what to make of it all. I mean, I think it's up to the fans to make as much of what we see going on as everybody else, because I don't think anybody has a real clue as to how it's all working. I mean, the numbers, just to refer to them again, the numbers we're seeing over those individual laps on the soft tire, they're so disparate, they're so odd that it defies logic, really, doesn't it? And actually, I've only just noticed this putting it down there. Look where Max is. He's in 5th gear at 217 at exactly the same point that Oscar Piastri's in 7th gear at 246. Going down the pit straight. I mean, what is that all about? Well, we know what it's all about. He doesn't have any power at that point, does he? But he is doing 333 going into 130R. It doesn't add up for the lap. Ridiculous. Okay, well, that's it for Friday. You've got the basic results, and we've got some trends there, but we don't seem to have much explanation of what's going on. I think Red Bull are just trying something completely different to everybody else, basically, because they've got understeer, and Max isn't able to drive the car through the understeer issues in the way that he normally could. Not that he was able to completely rectify them, but he could do something on a soft tire lap, but he can't even do that now. And that's probably what, that's what I take out of this Friday, to be honest. Anyway, we'll have a look, see what happens Saturday. We'll be back with videos, of course, over the weekend. Don't forget that we will be trying to do a little bit of additional content as well over the weekend. Can't tell you exactly what that's going to be at this point, but that could be for members only. So if you haven't joined the channel yet as a member, you're invited to do so. It'd be good fun to have you. It'd be excellent to have you. And also, just wanted to say that I'm putting quite a lot of content now on the community page of our channel, kind of using it as the way I used to use X or Twitter, and don't use any of the other social media platforms. And there's hopefully there's some quite good information there. And to be notified of when I am posting on community, click the bell next to the join and subscribe tabs below our videos. If you click that bell, that will then give you a notification when there's a new post in the community section. And I'm going to keep using that community section with photographs, past, present, and future. Well, past and present, and analysis of current racing, and indeed looking back as well. So that's something to look out for. Anyway, thanks for watching today. Let's see what happens over the weekend. See you soon. Well, no surprise with the overall results of qualifying. Mercedes again on the front row. I think it's going to be a fairly standard pattern for most of the year. But I guess the big surprise is that Kimi Antonelli is continuing. Well, surprise is the wrong word. Refreshing moment of the day is that Kimi Antonelli continuing the momentum he gathered in China with that fabulous win in China from the pole. And now on the pole at Suzuka, on the driver's circuit, on a circuit where George Russell would have flown in thinking, yeah, we're on a real driver's track now. I need to get back to where I should be. And Kimi just blew him away. Just unbelievable. It was always Kimi on top, and it was always George scratching around to try to match his young teammate. Afterwards, George spoke of how the car had changed dramatically from free practice on Saturday morning through to qualifying, a comment echoed by many other drivers on the grid, usually the ones that were beaten by their teammates. And of course, there always is that factor, but it is the same for everybody. And if the track did change, if the wind got up, if the wind direction changed, then it changed too for Kimi Antonelli. So a fabulous lap. I'll be getting on a little bit further into this video, analysing the differences between the two of them over their best laps in qualifying. But just to continue the summary from the get-go, Oscar Piastri continuing the pace he showed yesterday, gathering confidence, it looks, with every lap. Qualified P3 for McLaren-Mercedes. Brilliant drive by Oscar. Best he's driven, well, probably best he's driven since first quarter of last year. Looking really good. Short corners, again, starting to appear in his vocabulary. And very calm as ever, and doing an excellent job getting the best from the McLaren-Mercedes. Whilst teammate Lando Norris also looking very polished, but still playing a little bit of catch-up after the time he lost yesterday, qualifying 5th in the other McLaren. Splitting the two, Charles Leclerc, absolutely fabulous to watch as well around Suzuka. Enjoying himself, big smile on his face generally. Big moments as well, catching them as only Charles can, and still getting the lap time out of the car. On this occasion, Lewis pretty near him. I mean, this is a very good looking Lewis Hamilton. It's not a Lewis Hamilton who's half a second off the pace and wondering where the time has gone. It's Lewis constantly looking at little areas where he can improve, and in certain parts of the lap looking better than Charles. and finishing just behind Charles, which is about where you would expect him to be. On the days, obviously, when he's going to be quicker than Charles, great. But when he's not, he needs to be within a tenth or two, and that's where he is now. That's the sweet spot he's now found at Ferrari. So a very good day, I thought, for Lewis Hamilton, who starts sixth behind Lando Norris. And then quickest of the rest, Pierre Gasly, who I've often praised on this channel. Enormous talent. Untapped, really, in terms of the cars and the teams he's had to drive throughout his career in Formula One. Red Bull, obviously, but early days for him then. Really, really classy driver now. And you can see him getting that Alpine team with Steve Nielsen by the scruff of the neck and really getting everybody to gel now. So if you wanted to look at it another way, Alpine, now a Mercedes customer, only 2/10 behind Lando Norris, the world champion last year in the McLaren. So good to see that for Pierre, and very, very good for Alpine. Shame about the other car, Colapinto qualifying 15th. But speaking of teammates, perhaps the biggest story of the day is that Isack Hadjar out-qualified Max Verstappen. Yes, the Red Bull riddled with understeer, slow speed, it appears now. Max saying he just couldn't get the car to rotate slow, medium or high speed corners. It's there from yesterday. They've obviously made changes. They went to the other end of the spectrum in terms of power management around the lap, optimization thereof. Max using basically the same power optimization as everybody else, and of course his teammate Isack, but Hadjar beating him, and that's a significant moment, I think, in this 2026 season. It could mean the beginning of a downward spiral for Max Verstappen, who's just obviously not going to be enjoying his racing at all. And it could also, of course, be the moment when we celebrate this amazing talent that is Isack Hadjar, and what a good job he's doing with Red Bull, and what a good job Red Bull are doing with him as well. He was a bit more histrionic when he was driving for Racing Bulls, but now he's much more calm and learning and feeding off everybody in that environment. We'll get on again to the difference between Max and Isack later on in this video. And then the top 10 rounded out by amazingly Gabriel Bortoleto, who we've praised a lot already. Audi have done an outstanding job going into this new 2026 season with their own engine. I mean, Red Bull have been saying, well, you know, we're doing well, we've got our new powertrain, but Audi too, and what a job they've done. For a long time, Nico Hülkenberg looked very threatening, as if he would get into Q3, but indeed it was Gabriel Bortoleto who out-qualified his teammate. Excellent performance. And I wonder what Carlos Sainz, who could have been driving this Audi, is thinking now about his decision to go to Williams. Anyway, we've said that a few times, but yeah, great job by Audi. And then finally, top 10, another brilliant drive by Arben Lindblad in the V-Carb. Excellent. Didn't do much running yesterday. Hasn't done any long runs at all. But when it mattered, he got into Q3. Great lap in Q2. Q3, of course, he had to basically sit it out and he will start 10th. But Q2, what an outstanding lap from him as well. So congratulations to him. So under the heading of this Formula One is very difficult to penetrate. Yes, we can look at it as we just have, which in terms of lap time, who's starting where and what the racing may be like tomorrow. But to try to delve deeper, to try to understand why one driver is doing a better job than another. I've never known a more difficult time in the history of the sport, because nothing is parallel anymore. It's all about optimization of the power around the lap, and it could differ, obviously differs from team to team, but it does differ also clearly between driver and driver. But just to continue the theme of how well the younger, newer drivers are doing in Formula One in these new regulations, look at this. Mercedes Kimi Antonelli, 0.298 faster than his teammate George Russell, much more experienced teammate George Russell around a circuit like Suzuka, and quicker in sectors 2 and 3. McLaren we know about. I mean, there's no real thing there. Lando obviously didn't get a lot of running in yesterday, but Oscar completely dominant so far this weekend on the overall lap and in all 3 sectors. Red Bull, Isack Hadjar, as we say, out qualifying Max Verstappen, quicker in sectors 1 and 2. Never thought we'd get to say that Max Verstappen was beaten by his teammate through sector 1, through the S's, etc. in Suzuka. But anyway, it happened today. And then at VCARB, this brilliant performance from Arben Lindblad. Again, didn't do much running yesterday, quicker than Liam Lawson sectors 1, 2 and 3. But if we focus a little bit more on the differences between the two, it appears that turn 9, the second Degner, the slower of the 2 Degners, is a really critical corner. Obviously, it's a slow corner leading on to a straight, which has a kink in it, a flat-out kink, the Eddie Irvine kink, where Eddie memorably shunted in 1999. Anyway, that's an important part of the circuit because it is a straight, and it is therefore a power harvesting area. And the faster you can get into the power harvesting region, the better the lap's going to be. And it's all about, as we know now, power management as much as anything else. And if you looked at the difference between George and Kimi Antonelli coming out of 9 on their fastest laps in qualifying, Kimi reaches 175 kilometers an hour out of that corner, accelerating from 143 or thereabouts, while still not on full throttle. He's still squeezing the throttle. He's not reached maximum throttle, and he's at 175. Whereas George is at full throttle at 171. And I wonder whether that's a significant thing. We don't really know. I don't suppose the engineers know that much about the sensitivity of throttle application out of slow corners and how it affects the use of power and how much power is being used to generate the speed that they're going. But to me, that was quite a significant difference. Kimi's right foot there, really, really nice, really impressive to see those numbers, and look very, very good out of the corner as well. You can see it in the way the car is settling on the road. And for me, George is just driving the way George always drives. There's nothing over the top about George's driving ever, but it is quite spiky. And there's a good example. I've often said that about George. He's just a little bit more spiky than even Lando, although he's got other things that, in my opinion, are probably superior to Lando's. But George does have that sort of spiky edge to the way he drives, and that does show up in his throttle application. And there we saw it. Kimi actually has a significant advantage in speed as they reach the Eddie Irvine kink before the hairpin. And yeah, maybe or maybe not, that was significant. Between the two Red Bull drivers, it's a different story because the Mercedes is basically a good car. It's handling well at Suzuka, as it has in China and Melbourne, and it's got lots of grip, probably more efficient downforce than any other car on the grid. Well, it has for sure. And it's just a great car. It's good balance, relatively comfortable to drive. And so there's a very significant but small difference between George and Kimi on the lap. And I think that also showed up in Sector 3 for Mercedes, because George was not good in Sector 3. And possibly it's the way Kimi also is getting on the power out of the second tighter part of the horseshoe. George is very good into there, but again, it's very, very tight, that second part. And George, in addition, of course, had exactly what Max Verstappen wanted, a very pointy car due to some setup changes he had made going into qualifying. And by then, probably the rear tyres had overheated quite a lot. Now, is that the new way of being quick in a quick car? Probably. I mean, it always has been, and maybe Kimi already is starting to look as if he's up there with, say, Jenson Button and Sergio Perez in the way he puts the power down. He's really good, and that's being rewarded by these regulations in the way he's able to accumulate power out of slow corners. But getting back to Max and Hadjar, I thought one of the significant differences there was that Max was doing what you'd expect with these new regulations, going down to first for the hairpin, the turn 11 hairpin, which is a tight hairpin. Normally it's sort of fairly constant radius, but it seems to be more of an issue now because, again, there's a straight after that and another kink in that straight. And then that's all about power and how you use the power, and indeed how you can harvest power at some point on that straight going into spoon. And Max going down to first, but Isaac Hadjar staying in second for the hairpin and having, as it turns out, a more progressive use of power as well as a result of being in second. And I thought that was, I don't know, who am I to say that Max Verstappen made a wrong decision there in running first and taking first rather than second that Isaac had. But it could well be that with what we're comparing apples and oranges, because, as I say, the Mercedes is a very, very good car. The Red Bull at the moment is a terrible car with lots of understeer, the worst thing a car can have if you're Max Verstappen. He doesn't mind lots of oversteer because that implies that he's got a relatively pointy car and he can do something with the front end. But when you got understeer and he can't rotate the car the way he wants to, as I've always said about Max, that's all he ever wants is a front end, like Fernando Alonso. And he doesn't have that. So all of a sudden he's got far fewer tools with which to play now. And he's basically just having to drive the car through the understeer as well as he can. And because of all the other things that come into it, like the harvesting of the power and how you deploy the power, it's a much more difficult problem to solve now. And maybe Max will solve this problem. How you drive at the absolute limit a car that's got chronic understeer in a power management optimization formula. I don't think, well, of course, nobody's ever done that because we haven't had this formula before, but we haven't had a driver that good in a car that bad in this formula apart from Max Verstappen and, well, Fernando Alonso too, I suppose. But because the Ferraris are quite good now. And so it's interesting to see how Max does that. And as I kind of suspected, and I've mentioned this in a couple of live streams, all it's doing is basically bringing Max down to the level of just about everybody else who's pretty good. And Isaac Hadjar obviously is very, very good. And over a lap here, Isaac doing basically what Kimi Antonelli was doing, which is being very, very good out of slow corners. Whereas Max, I guess, just total frustration going in, doesn't have the front end he wants. He's trying to use the power, but he can't do that now because of the way the engine spikes if you try, or the power unit spikes if you try to give it a bit of correction mid-corner. That doesn't work anymore. So all he can do is live with the understeer. And I guess he's just waiting for the moment when he can get flat on the throttle and go for it. Whereas, Isaac's doing a better job probably in just getting the power on slightly more judiciously. Might be the right word. I'm sure that's not the word Max would use. So I think, when you've got a bad car in these regulations, it's quite difficult to solve the problem. And how do you get around the problem? And yeah, you can talk about tires and tire temperature and this and that, and you can mix and match. But the bottom line is that it's much more difficult now, I think. As I've said before, it's much more difficult for a driver like Max to get around a huge understeer issue. It's about the worst thing that could have happened in the car. Flick oversteer, yeah, live with that. But that's not what they got at Red Bull. And it's not a good thing, is it? They shouldn't have gone this far down this path. I mean, it's just insane. Obviously, the car is much worse than a V car, because you can see even Liam Lawson's top 10 in Sector 3, and for Arvid Lindblad to be this good after not much practice with exactly the same power unit, then, you've got to say, what have Red Bull been doing? And this, I suppose, definitively, we're at a real driver's circuit, a real chassis circuit, as you can see from the way the grid is formed. You've got to say right now, Red Bull, well, you could have said right now, in normal events, Red Bull are beginning now to really feel the loss of Adrian Newey. But then we look a bit further down the grid, behind the Cadillacs, and you see the Aston Martins, and you say, well, what was all that about anyway? The whole world is turned on its head, isn't it? Max beaten by his teammate. Adrian Newey's got the slowest car on the grid. I don't know. Where do we go from here? No, let's be a little bit more serious. And we'll talk about the difference between Lewis and Charles, which was good, very good for Lewis, because yeah, Charles got the lap in, but the difference is so small. And this is where Lewis should be. This is where he wants to be in order to build and build and build and have the confidence that he needs going into the year now. He never wanted to. He'd never want to be half a second away. But if you're a tenth or so away, that's exactly where he can be. And he knows now, for sure, that there will be moments and days when he can be ahead of Charles. And so that's good. As predicted, he will out-qualify him. And if Charles can win races in that car, which I think he probably will, then I think Lewis can as well. So good performance. But look where Lewis, if you look at the comparison between Lewis and Charles, there's a lot of Hamiltons there of where Hamilton is really, really quick around this lap. It all fell away for him out of Spoon, but very, very good otherwise. Excellent performance from Lewis. Anyway, there we go. Another video tomorrow after the race. Looking forward to it, inevitably, because it is the Japanese Grand Prix, one of my favorite races on what I think is still my favorite circuit, but I don't know. We'll have to wait and see how it goes. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to Track Ninja, and to REC Watches for their support of this channel, and of course, for you for watching. See you tomorrow. Well, that was a view that George Russell had of Oscar Piastri's McLaren-Mercedes in the opening phase of the Japanese Grand Prix, and how well Oscar drove as well. Seized the lead into turn one at the start, with the Mercedes making relatively tardy starts. Charles Leclerc very quick, but of course Oscar ahead of him on the grid, on the clean side of the road, and just a superb opening lap. He looked great on track, particularly at the top of the hill, out of the S's, where he wasn't asking too much of the car, just getting it perfectly positioned and not making any of the corners go on too long, as he has been, as the habit he fell into in the last couple of years. But this was the Oscar Piastri that we saw in style when he first arrived at McLaren, before he began to relate everything to what Lando was doing. And now he's his own man again, as kind of predicted, as we did say over the winter, with Lando having won his championship, Oscar now hungry as a dog and just brilliant in the early laps of that Japanese Grand Prix. And there was a phase when George, in that early phase before it all kind of collapsed for everybody. Well, not everybody, we'll get onto that in a minute. But in chasing Oscar, George's rear tyres did begin to overheat. And there was quite a lot of discussion on the radio for Oscar about how much to extend the stint and what he could do on the hard tyres in the second part of the race. And yeah, the general feeling was, including that of Oscar's obviously, was that if he could hold track position, not that easy to overtake around Suzuka, he could potentially win the Grand Prix. So that's the first thing that needs to be said. Oscar Piastri, absolutely brilliant today, I thought, in Japan. And great to see McLaren back, well, right up there with Mercedes now in terms of time management, looked really good. And they were very quick, as we saw. But it all changed on lap 22 of the 53-lap race when there was quite a big shunt for Oliver Behrman going in towards Spoon on the fast run through the kink, the right-hand kink before Spoon. He went off on the outside of that kink, came across the track and hit the barrier on that side. We'll talk a little bit more about that again further into the video. But that meant a safety car. George Russell had unbelievably just stopped the lap before for his hard tyres. Oscar Piastri had stopped as well. But it was perfect timing for Kimi Antonelli because he'd made a slow start. He'd been behind both Ferraris and both McLarens in the early laps of the race. He scythed through those, but it was always going to be George Russell against Oscar Piastri in terms of the Grand Prix, all things being equal. But with the safety car coming out, effectively Kimi then had a free pit stop. And from that moment, it was Kimi Antonelli's race. We had a little bit of an interesting insight into the dynamic between George and Kimi when they were behind the safety car, awaiting the restart. And George got on the radio to say, is Kimi going to restart in the place that we practiced that he would do so? In other words, could George anticipate where Kimi was going to do that? And the reply came, we don't know, George. Interesting, eh? Anyway, Kimi did the restart at about where you would expect, just before the chicane, where he could just slow everybody down and then accelerate out of the corner, which he did really well. And then he just disappeared into the distance, driving beautifully. Kept setting fastest lap, even though his margin over Oscar very quickly grew to 5 seconds or so. And then beyond that, 10, 12, 13 seconds, he was still setting fastest laps right at the end and finished the race with the fastest lap to his credit. So an outstanding drive by Kimi Antonelli. The start, the side, and it's probably not his fault because there were a lot of slow starters off the line in Suzuka. But those early, he even drove well in recovery from those early laps. Great passes and clean, looked after the tyres, and was always there ready to respond to George if ever George got up to P2 and could put any sort of threat on him. And that never happened anyway. So Kimi Antonelli wins 2 races in a row. For me, this is a reminder of that time, that golden period in '85 when Nigel cracked it at Brands Hatch and won after a big battle against Keke Rosberg, his Williams Honda teammate, and then followed it up straight away with a win in South Africa in the South African Grand Prix. And it's a little bit like that for Kimi, same feeling, just wow, this guy is just on a roll now, and he knows how quick he is, he knows how confident he is, he knows how he got the pole at Suzuka. There were little areas, we talked about it yesterday with his throttle application, and roll on the slower circuits as well ahead of us for Kimi Antonelli. So yeah, just amazing. Oscar Piastri, of those that were caught out by that safety car intervention, still did a great job and finished second and ultimately beat both Ferraris and George Russell. George Russell beaten by Charles Leclerc as well. A very, very tough day for George Russell. I was listening to him quite a lot on the radio, and there was obviously, he was expletive deleted when the safety car came out. Again, an interesting dynamic. All this stuff about so proud of Kimi, so pleased with the way he's going, wonderful how he's doing a great job for the team. Didn't hear any of that stuff today from George. No surprise. It's all changed now, isn't it? And even then he was muttering about, what had happened in China, and now the same thing again. We got to get on top of this, and isn't it dreadful? And George then had a big battle with the Ferraris. Lewis Hamilton, really good, ahead of Charles Leclerc because of the pit stop thing. He was another one that benefited. And Lewis, very good in defence into turn 1, which is where George is always very good. He's always been brilliant into turn 1. But Lewis was fabulous out of the chicane on the approach to turn 1, just perfect positioning of the car on the inside. George would be right up alongside him. Admittedly, this is all power harvesting area. So it's not real racing in the sense that they're going into the corner flat out, trying to brake as late as possible. None of that. But nonetheless, positioning was important. And George had the run, but several times Lewis just perfectly positioned and would hold it going into one. And Lewis looking good. I mean, as we said yesterday, but when we saw him on track near Charles Leclerc, and indeed near George, you could see that Lewis is still using longer corners than those two, and particularly longer corners than Charles. And whilst the tyres can take it, and you can see him sort of doing some sort of wide approaches and a little bit of oversteer going in through some of the S's, for Lewis, it was just using the tyres too hard. And ultimately, towards the end of the race, Charles was all over him in terms of tyre grip and pulled away from George to finish a very good third. Excellent third for Charles Leclerc. Had to fight to get past Lewis. It wasn't that easy. Had to pass him on the outside. Indeed, let's just talk about some of the passes. I know it's all over the place, but these Grand Prix are all over the place. There's so many facets to them. But there were a lot of overtakes. Mainly, it was a driver passing another driver going into the chicane, both of them in power harvesting mode coming out of 130R, and then one of them doing less than the other and getting a lead going into the chicane. And then inevitably, the guy that had just been passed would then repass going into one. Now, those will all add up as overtakes in the Japanese Grand Prix. But let me give you an example of the sort of radio discussions that were taking place. There was a big battle for what turned out to be 7th place in the end between Pierre Gasly in the Alpine, who I've been singing the praise of Pierre and how well he's driving. And after the restart, he had Max right behind him, both on new sets of hard tyres. All bets are off. These two just racing one another to the finish. And Pierre, absolutely no mistakes, just superb and consistent, would have annoyed Max like crazy not being able to get past the Alpine. But he did once. He got past the Alpine with about 4 laps to go in one of these things where obviously he was doing less power harvesting coming out of 130R and he had a little bit more speed going into the chicane. So he passed Pierre. And as they came down past the pits into one, of course, Pierre just blasted past Max again because Max had used up his power or whatever was going on with the whole power deployment thing. And they got on the radio to Max. JP got on the radio and said, well, now we know we can do that, Max. Well, we'll go away now and have a look at some strats and see what we can come up with for the last lap. And that was like, is this what racing has come down to? Doesn't matter that Max Verstappen's driving this car. It's just a question of whether Red Bull can get the strategy right in terms of the power deployment. And there was another discussion with George Russell. And this is just to give you an idea of what Grand Prix racing is about now in 2026. George is at this point struggling against the Ferraris, really against Leclerc, and Leclerc's getting away from him. And they say, George, just for information, late P-rate presses are not helping very much. We need to be early with the P-rate presses, with the power rate presses they've got on the steering wheel there. And that's what it is. It's nothing to do with oversteer, understeer, traction. We can give you a bit more top speed, whatever it is. It's all about when you're pressing the P-rate button on the steering wheel. Now, there will be those saying, oh, isn't that great? Isn't that brilliant? Racing's a completely new thing now. Well, I'm not sure I see it that way because, those passes were, full credit to Charles Leclerc because he was the guy that was usually not doing the passes into the chicane. He was the guy that was doing the pass into turn one and usually on the marbles on the outside. So that was always fun to watch Charles doing that. And he pulled off, about 4 passes doing that on the outside. But most of the others were all these ridiculous things. Anyway, getting back to the start, which in many ways, it didn't define the race because the race was clearly redefined when Oliver Bowman had his crash and the safety car came out, and that really hurt guys like George Russell. Although, as I say, Oscar Piastri finished second, and it hurt him as well. So that also needs to be borne in mind, how good the McLaren driven by Oscar Piastri was today. It clearly beat the Mercedes driven by George Russell. And the only Mercedes that beat Oscar was Kimi Antonelli, who did get the benefit of the safety car. So potentially Oscar could have won that race. We need to always remember that point. But let's just have a look. I've done some stats now of what they were doing off the line and that's in the order in which they started the race. Obviously, that's the grid order. Kimi Antonelli makes quite a good initial start, but then just the Mercedes just bogs down in a way we haven't seen this year so far. So there's the first thing that's quite interesting. And I don't know whether it's significant or not, but at the moment they released the clutch, Kimi had 10.3 on the clock and George 9.2. And the only other driver who was over 10 was Bortoleto, and he also made a slow start. So maybe Kimi had too many revs. So when he's doing 70 kilometers an hour in first, the pole man, George Russell, who qualified second, is doing 129 in second. So he makes a great start from the dirty side of the road. Nothing to do with clean or dirty here. Look at that. And Oscar Piastri on the clean side, 148 with Kimi Antonelli in front of him doing 70. So that's a huge speed differential. And as we keep saying, this is not a good thing. Speed differentials on the line, on the grid, are not good things at all. Anyway, George is in second by then. Oscar's still in first, about to take second. Ferrari make a reasonable start. We've seen the Ferraris make fabulous starts in the first two races of the season. And here, Charles Leclerc, pretty good, 131 in second. Bear in mind, he is on the dirty side of the grid, so he's probably maximised what he's going to do from there, and slightly better than George. So that's sort of Ferrari where we've seen them. And Lando Norris, 140 in first. Yeah, pretty good. McLaren, full marks off the line, very quick. Lewis Hamilton, though, in the other Ferrari, 108 in second. So Ferrari isn't just a car that you can just plug in and go and be instantly quick off the line, because Lewis did not make a brilliant start today, as you can see. Pierre Gasly, very good in the Alpine, 133 in first gear. Isaac Hadjar, though, and Max Verstappen in the factory Red Bull Ford RB powertrains, very slow. Again, Max has had slow starts now in all three Grand Prix, and that is not a good thing. It's a bit like the yips in putting, I think. It just, I don't know how they're going to get out of it. I was on board watching Max doing practice starts, and they were not good either. So they don't seem to be making... I suppose Red Bull have got so many other problems that actually solving the problem of why they're slow off the line is probably not at the top of their lists at the moment, because it's kind of moot because they're not qualifying at the front anyway. But having said that, it's interesting that they are still very slow off the line. Isaac Hadjar, 85, Max Verstappen, 97, still both in first gear. Gabriel Bortoleto, another one who actually faded without trace in the race very quickly in the Audi. Very slow off the line, probably related to that. But interesting to see the V-carb, though, of Arvid, 116 in second. So this is not a Ford Red Bull powertrain issue. This is some sort of Red Bull clutch issue, I would imagine. It's something like that. Because there's Lindblad, again showing there's nothing wrong with that power unit getting it off the line. And Esteban Ocon, good too, in the Haas Ferrari 127 second gear. So that was good. The shunt with Oliver Behrman, we talked about the speed differentials off the line. It was a weird shunt, weird place for it to happen. And we should say here it was a dry race, though it was medium and then hard for virtually everybody. And the three cars, they're running very closely together. Lindblad, Colapinto and Behrman, all on new sets of hard tyres. And they come out of the hairpin. And on the lap in which this incident happened, this shunt happened, Colapinto, for some reason, unaccountably, goes back to sixth. Having got seventh, he then goes back to sixth, and he just loses a little bit of power. And he does that at exactly the moment that Oliver Behrman is pulling up right behind him with a toe, thinking he's going to pass him on the left and get the inside run down into Spoon. And because of that gear change back down to sixth, there's a slight speed differential, not a lot, probably 4 or 5 kilometers an hour. And Oliver sort of moves violently to the left to avoid the Alpine, gets on the grass and then slides into the barrier. Actually hurts his right foot too. I think he's going to be okay. We've got the brake now, so that's a good thing from his point of view. But that was a speed differential shunt caused by these regulations, induced by these regulations, because there's no way Colapinto in normal circumstances would be accelerating out of the hairpin, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and then going back to sixth again mid-corner through the kink if he wasn't doing something to try and get more power into the engine, harvesting more power. And that's what that was. That was a speed differential shunt that we would not have seen in the old regulations. So that needs to be borne in mind as well. And I think we've got this break now. They need to look into that, the FIA, because that is, we've been predicting that sort of thing will happen. And it was because they're going that quickly. If you make the slightest odd thing and you're pulling up to pass a car and suddenly that car slows a little bit, even a little bit, there's going to be an incident. And that's what we saw today. Not good in my opinion at all. So let's just sum up with the results. Kimi Antonelli won basically as he chose, having made a bad start but benefited from the safety car, but made full use then of his track position, i.e. being back in front, and just disappeared, drove beautifully from that moment onwards. He drove well throughout the day, just made a terrible start. That was it. But otherwise, fabulous from the pole, set fastest lap, excellent performance. Oscar Piastri, similarly brilliant in the McLaren-Mercedes, but decided to come in, or the team brought him in for hard tyres the lap before the safety car deployment. So that's why he finished second. It could have been a win for Oscar Piastri today. We shouldn't forget that about the Japanese Grand Prix. Third, Charles Leclerc, another great drive by Charles. Lots of spectacular overtaking on the outside, if you want to call it over. Well, it is overtaking if you're doing it on the outside on the marbles. I'll give him that. But it was all induced again by all these, power things and harvesting going into the chicane. And it's all a bit weird. George Russell unable to beat Charles, not happy, not a good day for him, compounded by running near the harvesting limit and a strange super clip at some point. Safety car came out at exactly the wrong moment. So a difficult day for George Russell, overheating the rear tyres more than Kimi Antonelli around Suzuka, which is not a good omen for the slower circuits to come, but plenty of extraneous circumstances for George to think about, which may confuse the matter in terms of him finding his sweet spot again. Obviously, the problem going into Q3 in China, and then the safety car thing in Japan. You could say, well, without those, George would have been right up there, but that's pushing it a bit far. And the Kimi Antonelli George Russell battle, intra-team battle, suddenly takes on a whole new feel and a new colour for the season. And wow, it's going to be fascinating to see how it evolves. Lando Norris drove round and round, finished fifth in the McLaren. Definitely longer corners than Oscar Piastri at Suzuka, specifically through the S's, asking more of the car at the top of the hill, turn 6, turn 7, noticeably. But otherwise, a good professional drive by the world champion, waving to the crowd afterwards. Lewis Hamilton finished behind Lando, cooked his tyres, but he would have enjoyed the day, I think, because there's quite a lot of racing, there's quite a lot of defending, bit of attacking. Various points he was somewhere near the Mercedes. For Lewis to be leading George Russell as he was for quite a long time, a nice feeling of, well, I'm in the Ferrari now, you're in the Merc, I'm glad I made the move, that sort of thing. So it's all good for Lewis, but over the race distance, Charles Leclerc much better on tyres and just decisive at the right moments as well. But that's okay. Ferrari looking good, made some solid improvement. McLaren have caught them though, that's for sure. And Lewis, a good teammate for Charles Leclerc. That's what we say now after these 3 races. Then came Pierre Gasly and Max Verstappen, both of whom benefited, if you like, from the safety car, but it didn't really help them. They probably would have finished exactly where they did, whether they'd stopped before the safety car or after it. But before Berman's accident, by the time Max had got through the traffic and had got behind Pierre, there was 4.5 seconds between them at that point, and the gap never changed. It just stayed 4.5 seconds right up to the moment they came in for hard tyres, which says a lot about the Alpine and Pierre Gasly, and would have been, as I say, a frustrating time for Max, because he said before the race, he was chatting before the race to one of the interviewers and said, what are your expectations today, Max? And he said, well, we're not going to be one of the top 3 teams, but hopefully we'll be the best next team, the 4th team. And I thought, well, that's quite ambitious, bearing in mind how quick Alpine have been in qualifying. And so it proved, Alpine were the better team today with Pierre Gasly. And they beat Max Verstappen in a Red Bull that ran relatively reliably, albeit after a slow start, to the finish. And that's quite a decisive result, I think, on both sides of the fence. After the pit stop, they were obviously very close together at the restart. But Max he couldn't do anything about the Alpine. He just couldn't do anything about it. He got that one pass, which Charles then immediately redressed going into turn 1. And when it did come to the last lap, Max was pretty close, but Pierre just did a perfect job coming into the chicane, just didn't give Max any room at all. He had plenty of time to think about it. And Pierre knows his way around Suzuka as well. And he beat Max Verstappen. So another excellent performance for Alpine and Pierre Gasly. And a solid day for Red Bull. I mean, as they said afterwards, at least it gives us some data now from which to work and we can go forward from there. But overall, they don't have enough downforce on that car. They're not good off the line. Well, they're not good off the line Red Bull wise. They're not bad off the line V-carb wise. And a lot of work for them ahead. A bad day for Isaac Hadjar as well, went slow off the line and eventually finished 12th. The last point scorers were Liam Lawson, 9th in the V-carb. Good drive by Liam, just consistently in his groove and getting on with it. And 10th, Esteban Ocon in the Haas Ferrari, obviously making up a little bit for the drama with Oliver Berman, but equally we know how good Esteban is around Suzuka as well. He's had some great races there in the past. So there we are, 3 races down. Lots I still don't understand about this Formula One, but the storylines are getting intense. Kimi versus George, Lewis and Charles in the Ferraris. The McLarens are right back on the pace now, with Oscar looking really quick. And it won't be before long before he wins a Grand Prix, I suspect. So all that to look forward to. We do have a break now. We'll keep the videos coming along, obviously, and we're doing some live streams. I hope to have some special guests as well, so watch this space. And there'll be some special content as well for members coming up very soon. If you've joined the channel, thank you very much for doing so. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to Track Ninja, and to REC Watches for their support of this channel. And thanks to you for watching. See you very soon. Great to have with us, almost straight after the race, the brain of Mark Slade, one of the great engineers who knows what it's like to win at Suzuka. Mark, just out of the box, your take on the race?
Hi, Peter. Yeah, I thought the biggest thing really was, my impression was that McLaren kind of gifted the win to Kimi Antonelli and Mercedes by stopping Oscar unnecessarily early, and then obviously making him vulnerable to the safety car that did happen. Yeah, so at the time, he was pretty much holding George Russell, if anything, pulling away very, very fractionally, was not under any threat. And so by stopping Oscar, they immediately made themselves vulnerable to what happened, and it just didn't seem necessary.
Yeah, you make a very good point. And I think George had got on the radio to say the rear tires were starting to overheat at about that point when Oscar was starting to pull away. And I'm just wondering whether, Oscar having the difficult race in Australia, well, not even racing in Australia, and then the whole drama in China, whether they're just a little bit sort of, is it right to say, a bit race rusty and didn't want to take any risks and wanted to be conservative and were thinking maybe, well, if George's tyres are going off, ours are probably going to go off. Our time management hasn't been that good. Would there be any of that element in it, do you think?
It's difficult to say. I mean, I think it possibly, but there's just no excuse for it in my book. There was just literally no reason to stop him at that moment. Regardless of, if it looked like George was starting to catch him back up again, or if Oscar was saying, oh, my tyres are getting in a bad way, which obviously they weren't because he was holding the gap, then you might have reason to think, oh, we better stop. But in that situation where the gap was being maintained or even slightly extended, why would you stop? There's just literally no reason to stop. He's not under any pressure from anybody at that point. And as soon as you stop, you're at risk. And that's exactly what happened. So to me, it was just a blunder. I mean, maybe Mercedes would still have won the race. Maybe Oscar wouldn't have been quick enough on his hard tyres to hold them off. But at least if he had stayed out, he'd have been in a position to make life more difficult for them, which is always the game you should be playing. It's always harder to win from behind than in front.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And I was going to say, let's assume there'd been no safety car at all. And do we think Oscar could have won that race? Would have won that race? I mean, he certainly did a good job of beating, obviously, George. But George, having said that, got beaten by Charles as well. So it's a question. I mean, there would have been some fighting between Kimi and George for sure, and that might have slowed things down, and that might have given the advantage to Oscar.
Exactly, and he said so himself. He actually came on the radio a couple of laps before the stop saying, with the pace we've got, I think we can pull this off. So he was not in any trouble at that point. And it was just McLaren on the pit wall and in the strategy office getting nervous for no reason at all. They had it all in hand, and all they needed to do was just play it out. I mean, they were going to go onto the hard tyre. All the cars were going to go onto the hard tyre, and that tyre didn't look like it was capable of doing a good undercut. So there was just no reason for it, and I think it's possible that Oscar could have won that race.
It's interesting, isn't it? This whole business of the strategy team has evolved because it's such a complex business, but it's also evolved as a separate silo in order for it not to be compounded by emotion and stress, right? To keep it a little bit isolated from what might be going on the pit wall. And yet, as you just described it, in reality, there was probably a bit of a panic mode going on, which shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, it's just a failure of thought process, and they probably do have someone on the pit wall who is calling the shots. It's quite likely, most teams do, but that is a very stressful position to be in. So fundamentally, I think that there are problems with having it organised the way it is. But to me, yeah, I'm afraid it just shows a weakness in their overall armour. And we've seen it before, haven't we? Saw it last year at the end of the season, and I'm afraid it's played out again this time. It's just a simple mistake. There's no other way of thinking. It's just thinking about things incorrectly, and it plays out the way it does. I mean, it could well have been without a safety car, he'd have been home and dry. But the fact is, he just opened himself up to that possibility, and bang, there it goes.
Mark, let me ask you about George Russell's race, weekend almost. I mean, blown away. I mean, he spoke after the race about super clip that came in at the wrong moment, an unexpected super clip, and they maximized their storage. He can't be the only driver in the race with issues like that. And he got beaten by Kimi, right?
Yeah, I mean, it looked like that there was some talk about them making a setup change between P3 and quali. And it looked like he was generally having more issues with the rear stability under acceleration. So coming out of the chicane in quali, he always seemed to be having difficulty getting on the power compared to Kimi. And in the race, it looked the same. I think that was one of the reasons why he wasn't able to challenge Oscar early on, was because he was struggling to get out of the chicane as well as he should have been able to. And so George's car just didn't look particularly well balanced. Any power variations, I don't know. It's impossible to know what's going on with that sort of stuff now, isn't it? Mm. Knowing what we know about this reset business, where they can run low power or no electric power in sector one, and then have more power later in the lap. But if they use the throttle wrongly, they can slip into the wrong mode. And I mean, that's just an abomination in my mind, because as we saw with Charles Leclerc's qualifying lap in Shanghai, the driver can drive a faster lap and actually go slower because he doesn't know what the power is going to do. So that's a whole nother thing. But to me, it just looked like George's car, which, it comes down to him working with his engineer and making the decisions they did. Ultimately, they came up with a car that wasn't as good a car as Kimi and Bono managed. And Kimi looked very, very strong in quali, but then Kimi made a terrible start, didn't he? And from that point onwards, it looked like George had the upper hand in that Mercedes battle. But again, I think Mercedes stopped George earlier than they needed to, because yes, Kimi was behind him about just over 2 seconds and was starting to catch him. But I would have said until that gap came down to a second and a half, they didn't need to stop George, but they stopped George. And the same thing as with Oscar, straight away he's open to that risk, and it happened. Yeah, and you could feel you could hear the frustration in his voice. He was like, "Unbelievable second race in a row." It's like, yeah, but you were in that position of risk because of the situation you were in. So I'm afraid that's the way it goes. I've been on the wrong end of that many times myself.
And just going back to your original point about the car being a bit squirrely coming out of the chicane, and indeed out of turn 9 as well.
Yeah,
I mean, that in reality is what Kimi didn't have, and it may be because of the way he's driving the car. So it's not as if George had a different car, maybe that Kimi didn't. It all does come down to the driver in that respect.
I suspect that George was feeling under pressure from Kimi generally being quicker. George had probably commented that understeer was his biggest issue. And to fix understeer, they probably went slightly rearwards on the mechanical balance of the car, by softening the front bar or stiffening the rear bar for qualifying. They probably only made a relatively small step. But the trouble is, these cars are dragsters now. Getting the power down is the highest priority. Yes, understeer is a problem, but the driver should be able to kind of drive around the understeer to some extent. But if you have a car that you can't put the power down, then you are hosed with these cars, because that's where all the lap time is, with this extra power that they have on initial acceleration. So not getting the power down out of slower corners is gonna hurt you big time. And it sounds like they may have made a setup change after P3 untested, and he finds in qualifying that he probably still has understeer, maybe not quite as much as he had before, but now he can't get on the power as early as he was before, and so he's just at a disadvantage.
Let's talk about the start. Only one Ferrari super quick this time. Both Red Bulls terrible, even though Lindblad was actually quick off the line. Mercedes, as we say, with Kimi, not good. It was a bit of a mix, but both McLarens really good off the line.
Yeah. Well, it's the first time Oscar's done a race start this year, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Suzuka is more difficult because they're downhill, noticeably downhill. So the drivers have to keep some brake pressure on, which normally on a level surface you don't need to get away with. You don't need to, other than making sure that when you select gear, the car doesn't move. So a very light amount of brake pressure may be normal, but this time they probably had to put a little bit more on. And I suspect that because they're not used to doing that, I did notice that in practice they were allowed to do 2 starts at the end of each session. I think someone had recognised that this was a bit of a different situation and didn't want a problem at the start, so they were allowed to do a few more starts than normal. But it makes it that much trickier. And I think this time we saw that although some cars appear to have an advantage in terms of start performance, there was a bit more variation because of drivers just not quite getting it right this time.
Let's finish with that shunt of Oliver Behrman. He's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously he hurt his right leg a little bit. But looking at the traces, Colapinto, unlike the previous laps, suddenly goes from 7th back to 6th on that very quick kink, which was basically the straight. Presumably he's in a sort of power harvesting thing there, going back a gear, trying to get power, generate power. And at that moment, Ollie's catching him. And when he goes back to 6, obviously suddenly he slows a little bit, but it's enough speed differential to cause Ollie to have to swerve to the left. And that is a function of this whole power generation era in which we live.
Absolutely. So Franco would have been conscious that Ollie's on, putting him under pressure, and he's thinking, I need to have as much energy as possible down to 130R. So he's probably done something to sort of boost that going into Spoon, not expecting Ollie to try a move up the inside there. And you get this massive sort of 40, 50 kilometre an hour performance differential between the cars. Presumably, Franco wasn't looking to his left in the mirror, expecting Ollie to be there. He just thought Ollie would be behind, and he's come across, and Ollie's had no space and gone off. So, yeah, I would say that was entirely a function of the differential performance that comes from different recovery and deployment modes from these cars. And I don't think that's a good thing.
Have to agree with you there, Mark. And one final point. I did say final point in the previous one, but I'd just like to ask your opinion as an engineer also on this business of going straight on at the chicane as Lewis did, and then Lando getting on the radio saying he should have to give me the position now. What's your take on that when it's that sort of thing?
I think it's nonsense. We had a problem with Kevin back in I think it was 2024, when we got a penalty because he had gone off the circuit ahead of another car. I can't remember who it was. We didn't think anything of it. It's just like, that's the way it is. But the FIA came along and said, oh, yeah, because Kev went off the track, he gained an advantage over the car behind, and therefore we're penalising you. And it's just like, you're joking, aren't you? This is just madness. If it was a deliberate thing, deliberately done to, when you're under massive pressure from the car behind and you deliberately go off, like at the chicane at Monaco, if you deliberately run straight over there to deliberately keep the car behind, then I guess there's some potential that is the case. But on this particular occasion, when it happened with Kimi, it was just an error. Yeah, he made the error because he was under pressure, but it wasn't something he did on purpose to stop the car behind getting in front of him. And you could see that from the onboards. And I think this issue with Lewis is exactly the same thing. He's braked a little bit later than he needed to, locked up, run wide, but Lando's seen that happen, and he's just putting pressure on through what he knows the regulations are now. It's the same, George or Max would have done the same thing, saying, "Oh, that's not fair. He's gotten away with that." They're just using the radio as a means to try and leverage the FIA into making that sort of decision. But it's only possible because those sorts of silly decisions have been made to benefit the driver behind in the past, and I don't agree with it. I think, but you need someone strong in the stewards to make the right call. On this occasion, they found in Lewis's favour, but the trouble is, it's going to happen again because the drivers know one time they might get away with it, so they're always going to make that sort of call on the radio and see if they can get away with it. I guess it's part and parcel. It's part of the game, but it means the stewards have to be good at what they do. Most of the time they are, but occasionally they get it wrong. But this time they got it right, so that's fine.
Yeah, probably in Lewis's favour that Derek Warwick was one of the stewards. Always got a good brain on his shoulders.
Quite possibly.
Good. Very
possibly,
good. Yeah, old Derek. Mark, as ever, great pleasure to have you on board. Thank you so much for your input.
Thanks,
fabulous.
Peter.
And got 5 weeks now. Don't know what you're going to be doing in the 5 weeks. Probably more of the same, but equally love to get you on the show again. We'll have lots of chats and do some live streams as well.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, just give us a shout, Peter. Always a pleasure.